A piercing scream shattered the tranquil dawn in Columbia, Missouri. As Lillian O'Brien clutched her brother's lifeless body, the blood from his wound staining her pale hands crimson against the backdrop of the 1875 frontier town. There was no time to grieve. Jimmy needed help, and fast. Despite his ashen face, his chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless morning. The stagecoach robbery had been sudden and violent. One moment, they had been traveling peacefully toward their new home after leaving behind the crushing memories of their parents' death back east. The next, masked men had surrounded them, demanding valuables. When the driver had resisted, shots were fired. Most passengers had escaped unharmed, but 17-year-old Jimmy had caught a stray bullet when he tried to protect his older sister. "Help!" Lillian cried, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Please, somebody help us." Columbia was still waking up, the main street mostly deserted save for a few early risers. A passing stranger pointed her toward the doctor's office at the end of the street, and with strength born of desperation, Lillian half-dragged, half-carried her brother's lanky frame toward salvation. Dr. Willoughby's practice was a modest wooden building with a weathered sign swinging in the morning breeze. Lillian pounded on the door with her free hand, leaving bloody smudges on the painted wood. "Doctor, please, my brother's been shot." The door swung open to reveal a gray-haired man in a rumpled shirt, suspenders hanging at his sides. His eyes widened at the sight before him. "Get him inside, quickly," he ordered, helping Lillian maneuver Jimmy onto an examination table in the front room. The doctor worked swiftly, cutting away Jimmy's bloodied shirt to reveal the gunshot wound in his shoulder. "The bullet's still in there. I'll need to extract it," he muttered, more to himself than to Lillian. "Miss, I need you to wait outside. This won't be pretty." "No." Lillian gripped her brother's cold hand. "I'm staying with him. He's all I have left." Dr. Willoughby gave her a measured look, then nodded curtly. "Very well, but stay out of my way." For the next hour, Lillian watched as the doctor probed, extracted, and finally stitched the wound. Jimmy remained unconscious throughout, his breathing steadier but his face still frighteningly pale. "He's lost a lot of blood," Dr. Willoughby said, washing his hands in a basin. "But he's young and strong. With proper care, he should recover." Relief washed over Lillian like a summer rain. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so," she stopped, suddenly remembering their situation. After the robbery, they had nothing left. The small purse of coins she'd kept in her boot was all that remained of their savings. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and placed it on the doctor's desk. "Doctor." Willoughby counted the meager sum and frowned. "Miss, this isn't nearly enough for the surgery and care your brother will need." "It's all we have," Lillian whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, I'll work. I'll do anything. Just help him." "I don't run a charity, Miss O'Brien," the doctor said firmly. "I have my own expenses to cover. You'll need to find a way to pay the rest or take your brother elsewhere once he's stable enough to move." Lillian felt the walls closing in. Where would they go? Who would help them? They knew no one in Columbia, having only been passing through on their way to their uncle's farm near Independence. "Give me a few days," she pleaded. "I'll find work. I'll pay you back, I swear." The doctor seemed to soften slightly. 3 days, Miss O'Brien. After that, I'll need proper payment or you'll have to make other arrangements." Lillian nodded gratefully. 3 days to find work and earn enough money to pay for Jimmy's care. It seemed impossible, but she had no choice. The next morning, after a sleepless night in a chair beside Jimmy's bed, Lillian ventured out into Columbia to seek employment. The town was bustling now, merchants opening their shops, wagons rolling down the dusty main street, cowboys and farmers going about their business. She tried the general store first, where the owner, a portly man with spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, barely looked at her before refusing. "No positions available, miss. Try the saloon. They're always looking for pretty girls." His implication wasn't lost on Lillian, who left with burning cheeks and a heavy heart. The dressmaker was similarly unhelpful, as was the hotel. By midday, she was desperate enough to consider the saloon, though the thought filled her with dread. The Golden Nugget Saloon was already noisy despite the early hour, piano music spilling onto the street along with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Lillian hesitated at the batwing doors, gathering her courage, when a commotion further down the street caught her attention. A man on horseback was racing into town, his mount's hooves kicking up clouds of dust. Behind him, two other riders pursued, their faces set in grim determination. As they thundered past, Lillian caught a glimpse of the lead rider, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and intense eyes that briefly met hers. Gunshots rang out, sending bystanders scurrying for cover. Lillian pressed herself against the saloon wall, heart pounding. The lead rider swung off his horse in one fluid motion and took shelter behind a water trough, returning fire with deadly precision. One pursuer fell from his saddle, clutching his arm. The other reined in sharply, hesitated, then turned his horse and galloped back the way he had come, dragging his injured companion's mount behind him. The victorious gunman holstered his weapon and dusted himself off. As the townsfolk emerged cautiously from their hiding places, he approached the sheriff, who had appeared on the boardwalk with a shotgun in hand. "Bounty hunters," the man explained, his voice carrying to where Lillian stood. "Been on my trail since Jefferson City." "You've got some nerve coming to my town, Thornton," the sheriff growled. "Just passing through, Sheriff. No trouble intended. See that it stays that way." The lawman gave the stranger a hard look before returning to his office. Lillian watched as the man Thornton collected his horse and led it toward the livery stable. There was something compelling about him, a quiet confidence that drew her eye. She found herself following at a distance, forgetting momentarily about her quest for employment. At the stable, Thornton handed the reins to a young boy, along with a coin that made the child's eyes widen. "Take good care of him, son. He's had a hard ride." The boy nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Thornton." As Thornton turned to leave, he noticed Lillian standing in the stable doorway. His expression was guarded, assessing. "Can I help you, miss?" Lillian realized how strange she must appear following a stranger like this. No, I'm sorry for staring. It's just those men were trying to kill you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time." He studied her more closely, taking in her disheveled appearance and the worry etched on her face. "Are you all right, miss? You look troubled." Before she could answer, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the stress of the past 24 hours suddenly caught up with her. Lillian swayed on her feet, and the world began to darken at the edges. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Through a haze, she heard a deep voice calling her name had she told him her name. And then nothing. When Lillian regained consciousness, she was lying on a cot in a small room she didn't recognize. A woman with graying hair was pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "There you are," the woman said kindly. "Gave us quite a scare, you did." Lillian tried to sit up. "Where am I? What happened?" "You're at Mrs. Porter's boarding house. Mr. Thornton brought you here after you fainted, said you looked like you needed help." The woman handed Lillian a cup of water. "I'm Mrs. Porter, and you are Lillian O'Brien." She sipped the water gratefully. "My brother, I need to get back to him. He's at Dr. Willoughby's, wounded. Rest easy," Mrs. Porter soothed. "Mr. Thornton went to check on your brother after he brought you here. Said he'd come back with news." As if summoned by his name, the door opened and Thornton entered, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. Up close, Lillian could see that his eyes were a striking green, set in a face weathered by sun and wind but still handsome in a rugged way. "Your brother's doing fine," he reported. "Doctor says he's stable, though he hasn't woken yet." "Thank you," Lillian said, relieved. "I should get back to him." "After you've eaten," Mrs. Porter insisted, bustling out to fetch food. Left alone with Thornton, Lillian felt suddenly self-conscious. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Vaughn," he supplied. "Vaughn Thornton, and it's no trouble. Those men who were chasing you." Thornton's expression hardened slightly. "Nothing for you to worry about. They won't be back." Mrs. Porter returned with a tray bearing a bowl of stew and a slice of bread. As Lillian ate, she found herself telling Vaughn and Mrs. Porter about the stagecoach robbery, Jimmy's injury, and her desperate search for work to pay Dr. Willoughby. 3 days, she finished miserably. "I have 3 days to find enough money or Jimmy and I will be back on the street, and I've tried everywhere in town already." Mrs. Porter made sympathetic noises, but Vaughn remained silent, studying Lillian thoughtfully. "What skills do you have?" he asked finally. "I can read and write well. I kept the accounts for my father's business back in Philadelphia. I can sew, cook. I'm a quick learner." Lillian straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear pathetic. Vaughn nodded slowly. "I might know of something. Let me look into it." After finishing her meal and thanking Mrs. Porter profusely, Lillian returned to Dr. Willoughby's office with Vaughn accompanying her. Jimmy was still unconscious, but his color looked better. "I'll come back tomorrow," Vaughn promised before departing. "Try not to worry." But worry she did, through another night of dozing fitfully in the chair beside Jimmy's bed. The doctor checked on him periodically, each time reminding Lillian that the bill was growing. The next morning, Jimmy finally opened his eyes. "Lily," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Lillian was at his side instantly, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. "Jimmy, oh, thank God." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," he groaned. "What happened?" As gently as possible, she explained about the robbery and his injury. "Don't worry about anything," she assured him. "You just focus on getting better, doctor." Willoughby came in shortly after, examining Jimmy's wound with practiced hands. "The fever's broken, and there's no sign of infection. You're a lucky young man." Jimmy managed a weak smile. "Doesn't feel lucky." "Well, it is," the doctor said firmly. "Bullet missed anything vital. With rest and proper care, you should make a full recovery." He glanced meaningfully at Lillian. "2 more days, Miss O'Brien." After he left, Jimmy looked at his sister with concern. "What did he mean, 2 more days?" Lillian tried to keep her voice light. "Nothing for you to worry about." "I'm handling it." But Jimmy knew her too well. "Lily, we don't have any money, do we? It all went in the robbery." She couldn't lie to him. "We have a little, and I'm looking for work." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm always causing you trouble." "Don't be ridiculous," Lillian said fiercely. "You're my brother. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." A knock at the door interrupted them. Vaughn Thornton stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I wanted to check on the patient." Lillian introduced him to Jimmy, explaining how Vaughn had helped her the day before. "I've also brought news," Vaughn added. "The sheriff caught one of the robbers who attacked your stagecoach. He's in custody now, and they recovered some of the stolen goods." Hope flared in Lillian's chest. "Our belongings, some," Vaughn confirmed. "You can check with the sheriff later today, but I also wanted to tell you that I've found you a position if you're interested." "A job? Where?" "The Columbia Gazette needs someone to help with their accounts and correspondence. The editor's wife used to handle it, but she's expecting their first child and has been ordered to rest. The pay is modest but fair. Lillian could hardly believe her ears. That sounds perfect. When can I start? Today, if you're able. I told Mr. Reynolds about your situation, and he's willing to pay you a small advance. Jimmy squeezed his sister's hand. Go, Lily. I'll be fine for a few hours. With a grateful glance at Vaughn, Lillian agreed. After making sure Jimmy was comfortable, she let Vaughn escort her to the newspaper office, where she was introduced to Herbert Reynolds, the bearded, energetic editor of the Gazette. Mr. Thornton speaks highly of your skills, Miss O'Brien, Reynolds said, showing her to a small desk piled with papers. Let's see what you can do. For the next several hours, Lillian sorted through accounts, organized correspondence, and drafted replies to letters. By the end of the day, she had made significant progress on the backlog, earning Reynolds' approval and the promised advance. You'll do nicely, he declared. Come back tomorrow morning, same time. With money in her pocket, Lillian hurried back to the doctor's office, stopping first at the sheriff's to identify their recovered belongings sadly. Just a few items of clothing and a family Bible. Nothing of significant value. At Dr. Willoughby's, she paid a portion of their bill, promising to bring the rest soon. The doctor seemed satisfied for now, and Jimmy was pleased to hear about her new position. See, I told you everything would work out, he said, though they both knew it had been Lillian's determined optimism, not his, that had kept them going. After Jimmy fell asleep, Lillian stepped outside for some air. The sun was setting over Columbia, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. She was surprised to find Vaughn waiting on the doctor's porch. I wanted to make sure everything went well at the Gazette, he explained. It did, thanks to you. Lillian studied him curiously. Why are you helping us, Mr. Thornton? You don't know us. Vaughn leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow. Let's just say I know what it's like to be alone in a strange town with no one to turn to. There was a story there, Lillian sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, will those men come back, the ones who were chasing you? No, he said with quiet certainty. That particular problem has been resolved. Are you some kind of outlaw, Mr. Thornton? A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. Not exactly. I was a Texas Ranger once upon a time. Now I work independently. A bounty hunter. Sometimes. When the cause is just, he straightened up. You should get some rest, Miss O'Brien. Tomorrow will be another long day. Over the next week, a routine developed. Lillian worked at the Gazette during the day, spent evenings with Jimmy, who grew stronger each day, and often found Vaughn Thornton waiting to walk her back to Mrs. Porter's boarding house, where she had taken a small room. She learned bits and pieces about him. That he'd been born in Virginia but raised in Texas. That he'd fought for the Confederacy during the war but didn't care to talk about it. That he had a talent for tracking and a reputation as a man who finished what he started. What he didn't say was why he remained in Columbia when he'd originally been just passing through, or why he took such an interest in her and Jimmy's welfare. Lillian found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, drawn to his quiet strength and the glimpses of gentleness beneath his weathered exterior. Jimmy, too, seemed to idolize Vaughn, especially after the man brought him books to read during his convalescence and regaled him with carefully edited stories of his adventures on the frontier. He likes you, Jimmy teased Lillian one evening after Vaughn had left. I can tell. Don't be silly, she replied, though a blush warmed her cheeks. He's just being kind to strangers. Lily, he's stayed in town for over a week now, and I don't think it's because he loves Columbia so much. She shushed him, but the thought lingered. Did Vaughn Thornton have feelings for her? And what about her own growing attraction to him? 2 weeks after the stagecoach robbery, Dr. Willoughby declared Jimmy well enough to leave his care. The bill had been paid in full, thanks to Lillian's work at the Gazette and the advance Mr. Reynolds had generously provided. "Where will you go now?" Vaughn asked as he helped Jimmy, still weak but mobile, to a waiting wagon that would take them to Mrs. Porter's boarding house. "We were on our way to our uncle's farm near Independence," Lillian explained. "But—" she hesitated. "I've been thinking of staying in Columbia at least for a while. Mr. Reynolds has offered me a permanent position and Jimmy could finish school here." Vaughn's expression gave nothing away. "Columbia's a good town, growing fast. And you," Lillian ventured, "will you be moving on soon?" Before he could answer, a commotion erupted down the street. A man was staggering out of the Golden Nugget saloon, waving a pistol and shouting incoherently. People scattered, diving for cover as he fired a wild shot into the air. "Stay here," Vaughn ordered, his hand already on his gun as he strode toward the disturbance. The drunk swung around, pointing his weapon unsteadily at Vaughn. "Stay back, I'll shoot." "Put it down, mister," Vaughn said calmly, continuing his approach, "before someone gets hurt." "I said stay back." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next was so fast Lillian could barely follow it. Vaughn drew and fired in one fluid motion. The drunk's gun went spinning from his hand, and he howled in pain, clutching his bleeding fingers. The sheriff arrived moments later, taking custody of the now sobbing man. "Obliged for the assistance, Thornton," he said grudgingly. Vaughn rejoined Lillian and Jimmy, holstering his weapon. "Sorry about that." "That was amazing," Jimmy exclaimed. "You barely even aimed." "Years of practice," Vaughn said, helping Jimmy onto the wagon bed. "Not something to aspire to, son." As they settled Jimmy at Mrs. Porter's, Lillian couldn't help but wonder about the violence that seemed to follow Vaughn Thornton. Was he really the kind of man she should be developing feelings for? That night, after Jimmy was asleep, Vaughn invited Lillian to sit on the boarding house's front porch. The air was warm, fragrant with summer blossoms, and fireflies danced in the gathering darkness. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Vaughn said without preamble. The news shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. "Oh, I see. I have business in Kansas City, a job I took before I came here, of course." Lillian tried to keep her voice steady. "You've already stayed longer than you intended, I'm sure." Vaughn was silent for a long moment. "I'd like to come back, though, if that would be all right with you." Her heart quickened. "I think Jimmy would like that. He's quite taken with you." "And you, Lillian, would you like me to come back?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. In Philadelphia, gentlemen didn't speak so plainly, especially not to unmarried ladies. But Vaughn Thornton wasn't a Philadelphia gentleman, and somehow his straightforwardness was refreshing. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I would like that very much." Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Then I'll come back. You have my word." The next morning, Vaughn departed at dawn. Lillian watched from her window as he rode out of Columbia, a solitary figure silhouetted against the rising sun. She told herself not to hope too much, not to count on his return. Men made promises all the time, especially to women they might never see again. Life settled into a new pattern. Jimmy regained his strength and enrolled in the local school. Lillian continued working at the Gazette, taking on more responsibilities as Mr. Reynolds came to trust her abilities. They moved from Mrs. Porter's boarding house to a small but tidy cabin on the edge of town, which they rented from a widow happy to have reliable tenants. Weeks passed with no word from Vaughn. Lillian tried not to think about him, but memories of his voice, his rare smile, the way he'd looked at her that last night on the porch, kept intruding on her thoughts. Then, one stormy October evening, as rain lashed against the cabin windows and thunder rolled across the Missouri sky, someone pounded on their door, Jimmy, who had been reading by lamplight, looked up in alarm. Who would be out in this weather? Lillian approached the door cautiously. Who's there? It's me, came a familiar deep voice. Her hands trembled as she lifted the latch. Standing on their doorstep, rain-soaked and travel-worn but unmistakably real, was Vaughn Thornton. You came back, she whispered. I gave you my word. Jimmy let out a whoop of delight and rushed to greet him, bombarding Vaughn with questions about his adventures. Lillian moved in a daze, hanging up his dripping coat, stoking the fire, preparing hot coffee. Later, after Jimmy had finally exhausted himself with excitement and gone to bed, Vaughn and Lillian sat by the fire, the storm still raging outside. I didn't think you'd actually return, she confessed. I almost didn't, Vaughn admitted. There was trouble in Kansas City. Took longer than expected to resolve. Dangerous trouble, he shrugged, a gesture she was coming to recognize as his way of avoiding details that might worry her. Nothing I couldn't handle. Lillian studied his profile in the firelight. There was a new scar on his jawline that hadn't been there before, and his eyes looked tired. Why did you come back, Vaughn? Really? He turned to face her fully, his gaze intense. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your courage, your determination. The way you fought for your brother, the way you looked at me like you saw something worth seeing, her breath caught. And what did I see? I don't know, he said honestly. I'm not sure I'm the man you think I am, Lillian. My life isn't simple. I never thought it was. Vaughn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've done things I'm not proud of, made enemies, the kind of enemies that don't forget. Like those men who were chasing you when we first met. Worse. He sighed heavily. I came back to see you, but also to warn you. There's word that some men from my past might be heading this way. It might not be safe for me to stay in Columbia long. Disappointment washed over her. So you're leaving again? Not yet, he said quickly. But soon, probably. And I was wondering if you and Jimmy might consider coming with me this time. To California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we could start fresh. The offer stunned her. Vaughn, we barely know each other. I know, he acknowledged. It's too soon. But the offer stands. Think about it. Before she could respond, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the cabin, and the lamp on the table flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness save for the glow of the fire. Vaughn rose to relight the lamp, but Lillian caught his hand, stopping him. In the firelight, his face was all planes and shadows, beautiful and mysterious. Acting on impulse, she stretched up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained still, then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he returned the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I'm sorry, Lillian began, mortified by her boldness. Don't be, Vaughn said roughly. I've wanted to do that since the day I met you. The admission sent warmth coursing through her. Really, really. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. But I shouldn't have. Not until you know everything about me, about who I am and what I've done. Then tell me, she challenged. I'm stronger than I look, Vaughn Thornton. So he did. By the dying embers of the fire, he told her about his years as a Texas Ranger, about the war that had left him disillusioned and adrift. About turning to bounty hunting afterward, sometimes for the law, sometimes for private clients. About the blood on his hands, the men he'd killed most in self-defense or the line of duty, but not all. The men who were chasing me that day, he explained, they worked for a man named Blackwood. Jasper Blackwood. I killed his brother 2 years ago in El Paso. It was him or me, but Blackwood doesn't see it that way. He's been hunting me ever since. And that's why you want to leave, to protect us from this man, Vaughn nodded. He's ruthless, Lillian. He doesn't care who gets hurt as long as he gets his revenge. Lillian was quiet for a long time, processing everything he'd told her. "Thank you for being honest with me. You deserved the truth." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I can't leave Columbia right now. Jimmy's doing well in school and I have responsibilities at the Gazette, but I don't want you to go either." "It's not safe for me to stay," he reminded her. "Then we'll figure something out," she said firmly. "Together." The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Lillian's life, despite the shadow of Blackwood looming over them. Vaughn found work at the livery stable, his way with horses quickly earning the owner's respect. He took a room at Mrs. Porter's boarding house again, but spent most evenings at Lillian and Jimmy's cabin. Their romance blossomed under Jimmy's approving eye and the bemused observation of their neighbors. Vaughn taught Jimmy to ride and shoot, skills the boy had never had a chance to learn in Philadelphia. Lillian watched them together, her heart full, daring to imagine a future where they might be a family. But the specter of danger was never far away. Vaughn remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, his gun always within reach. He received occasional telegrams from contacts in other towns, keeping track of Blackwood's movements. "He's in St. Louis," Vaughn reported one evening in early December. "Getting closer." Lillian had learned not to show fear. "Then we'll be ready." Winter settled over Columbia, bringing bitter cold and heavy snowfall. Christmas approached, and despite the threat hanging over them, Lillian was determined to make it special, their first Christmas together, and the first since their parents' death that she and Jimmy might actually enjoy. She saved every extra penny from her salary to buy gifts. A new coat for Jimmy, who had outgrown his old one, and a finely crafted hunting knife for Vaughn, spotted in the general store's display and purchased after weeks of careful budgeting. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, they gathered in the cabin's warm kitchen. Jimmy hung stockings by the fireplace while Lillian prepared a modest feast. Roast chicken, potatoes, and an apple pie that filled the small space with its cinnamon aroma. Vaughn arrived bearing gifts of his own, a beautiful leather-bound journal for Lillian and a model ship kit for Jimmy, who had recently developed an interest in naval history. "This is too much," Lillian protested when she opened the journal, running her fingers over the tooled leather cover. "I saw you writing in that old notebook of yours," Vaughn said. "Thought you might like something nicer." She had indeed been writing sketches of their life in Columbia, memories of Philadelphia, hopes for the future. That he had noticed and remembered touched her deeply. They ate by candlelight, sharing stories and laughter. Jimmy regaled them with tales from school, his dramatic retelling of a classroom mishap bringing tears of mirth to Lillian's eyes. For a few precious hours, they were just a normal family celebrating Christmas, danger and uncertainty temporarily forgotten. After dinner, when Jimmy had gone to bed, Vaughn pulled Lillian close beside the fire. "I have something else for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but—" He pressed a small object into her palm, a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of herself and Jimmy that she hadn't even known was taken. "Mr. Reynolds helped me," Vaughn explained. "The Gazette had a photographer come through last month, remember? He took this when you weren't looking." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Help me put it on." As Vaughn fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin, Lillian felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could consider them. "I know it hasn't been long, but I do. I love you, Vaughn Thornton." His hand stilled. For a terrifying moment she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then he turned her to face him, his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I love you too," he said hoarsely. God help me, I do. Their kiss was tender at first, then increasingly urgent. Lillian wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, wanting more than just these stolen moments by the fire. Vaughn pulled back slightly, his breathing uneven. Lillian, stay with me tonight, she whispered against his lips, his eyes darkened. Are you sure? Your reputation, I don't care about that. And she didn't. Society's rules seemed trivial compared to the depth of her feelings for this man. I just want you, for however long we have. That night, in the small bedroom she'd made her own, Lillian gave herself to Vaughn completely. His hands and lips were gentle, reverent, as they explored each other in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. When they finally came together as one, the intensity of the connection brought fresh tears to her eyes, not of pain, but of overwhelming joy. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Lillian felt a contentment she'd never known before. Outside, snow continued to fall, insulating their cabin in a blanket of pristine white, as if protecting them from the world beyond. Marry me, Vaughn said suddenly, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Lillian raised her head to look at him. What, marry me, he repeated. I know there's still danger. I know I can't promise you an easy life, but I want to face whatever comes with you as my wife, not just this. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in Columbia's small church, with Jimmy as their only attendant and a handful of well-wishers in attendance. Mrs. Porter, Mr. Reynolds and his wife with their new baby, Dr. Willoughby, and a few others who had become friends over the past months. The ceremony was brief and simple, but as Lillian spoke her vows, she felt as if she were starting a new life, one full of uncertainty, perhaps, but also full of love. They had just stepped outside the church, accepting congratulations from their small party, when Lillian noticed Vaughn stiffen beside her. What is it? She asked, instantly alert. His eyes were fixed on a man across the street, watching them from the shadow of a storefront. Take Jimmy and go to Mrs. Porter's, he said quietly. Now. Vaughn, please, Lillian, do as I ask, the fear in his voice convinced her. Gathering Jimmy, she made excuses to their guests and hurried toward the boarding house, glancing back only once to see Vaughn approaching the stranger with his hand resting on his gun. For hours, she waited at Mrs. Porter's, pacing anxiously as Jimmy tried unsuccessfully to distract her with a game of checkers. When the door finally opened, Lillian nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of Vaughn, whole and unharmed. Who was he? She demanded once they were alone in Mrs. Porter's parlor, Jimmy having been sent upstairs with hot chocolate. One of Blackwood's men, Vaughn confirmed grimly. Scouting ahead, Blackwood himself isn't far behind. What did you do to him? Nothing, just talked. Warned him that if anything happened to you or Jimmy, there wouldn't be a hole deep enough for Blackwood to hide in. Vaughn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. He'll report back. It won't change anything, but at least they know I'm aware they're coming. What do we do now? We leave. Tonight. Pack only what you can carry easily. Lillian shook her head. No, this is our home. I won't be driven out by threats. Lillian, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. If we run now, we'll be running forever. Sooner or later, we have to stand our ground. They argued long into the night, finally reaching a compromise. They would stay in Columbia for now, but Jimmy would be sent to stay with friends of Mrs. Porter's on a farm outside town, safely away from any potential confrontation. The following days were tense, each sound making Lillian jump, each stranger in town a potential threat. Vaughn convinced the sheriff to deputize him temporarily, giving him official standing if trouble came, and come it did, on a bitter cold morning in mid-January. Lillian was at the Gazette, reviewing the books when the door burst open and Mr. Reynolds rushed in, his face pale. "Men asking for your husband," he gasped. "Armed, mean-looking, sheriffs talking to them now." Lillian's blood turned to ice. "How many?" "5, counting the leader." She grabbed her coat and hurried outside, Reynolds calling after her to be careful. The main street was eerily quiet, townsfolk having sensed danger and retreated indoors. In front of the sheriff's office stood a group of mounted men, their horses steaming in the cold air. At their center was a tall figure in a black coat and hat. Blackwood, she presumed. The sheriff and Vaughn faced them from the boardwalk, their postures tense but controlled. Lillian approached cautiously, catching the tail end of a heated exchange. "Personal matter, Sheriff," Blackwood was saying, his voice cultured but cold. "Between Mr. Thornton and myself. In my town, it's my matter," the sheriff countered. "I suggest you and your men move on, Mr. Blackwood, after I settle accounts with the man who murdered my brother." Vaughn spotted Lillian then, his expression changing from controlled anger to alarm. "Lillian, go back inside." But it was too late. Blackwood had followed Vaughn's gaze, his eyes settling on her with calculating interest. "Ah, the new Mrs. Thornton," he said silkily. "My congratulations on your recent nuptials. Leave her out of this," Vaughn growled. "But she's already in it, isn't she, by virtue of her unfortunate choice in husbands?" Blackwood tipped his hat to Lillian with mocking courtesy. "My quarrel isn't with you, Mrs. Thornton. Just with the man who gunned down my brother in cold blood." "It wasn't cold blood," Vaughn said evenly. "Your brother drew on me. Ask anyone who was there." "Witnesses can be bought," Blackwood dismissed. "And in any case, my brother deserved a fair fight, not to be shot down by a so-called lawman with a questionable reputation." The tension in the air was palpable, a storm about to break. Lillian found herself moving closer to Vaughn, unwilling to leave him to face this alone. "What do you want?" she asked Blackwood directly. The man seemed surprised by her boldness. "Justice, Mrs. Thornton, nothing more. You want revenge," she corrected. "They're not the same thing." A thin smile curved Blackwood's lips. "Perhaps not, but it's what I'll have one way or another." "Not in my town," the sheriff interjected. "I'm giving you and your men 1 hour to leave Columbia. After that, I'll consider you trespassers and act accordingly." For a tense moment, Blackwood seemed to consider pushing the issue. Then he shrugged elegantly. "As you wish, Sheriff. 1 hour it is." His eyes found Vaughn again, cold as the January sky. "But don't think this is over, Thornton. A man like me can afford to be patient." With that, he wheeled his horse around and led his men toward the saloon, presumably to wait out their hour in somewhat warmer surroundings. The sheriff turned to Vaughn and Lillian. "I meant what I said. They cause any trouble, they'll answer to me, but I can't make them leave the territory, Thornton, and I can't watch your back forever." "I know," Vaughn acknowledged. "Thank you for standing with me today." When the sheriff had gone, Lillian grasped Vaughn's arm. "What now?" "Now we make a plan," he said grimly. "Because the sheriff is right, Blackwood won't give up, and he's just shown he knows exactly how to hurt me." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Lillian sent word to Mrs. Porter to keep Jimmy where he was, safely away from town. Vaughn spoke with several of the townsmen who had become friends, arranging for additional eyes to watch for trouble. As promised, Blackwood and his men left Columbia when their hour was up, riding out with exaggerated casualness that fooled no one. They were biding their time, not giving up. That night, as Lillian and Vaughn sat by their fire discussing options, a knock came at the door. Vaughn answered it, gun drawn, to find a young boy from the telegraph office clutching a yellow paper. "Message for Mrs. Thornton," he panted. "Came in just now. Operator said it was urgent." The telegram was from Independence. Their uncle had finally received word of their whereabouts and was desperate to know they were safe. With everything that had happened, Lillian had neglected to send him their new address after the stagecoach robbery. "We should tell him we're all right," she said, reaching for paper to draft a reply. "Wait," Vaughn stopped her. "This gives me an idea." His plan was audacious. They would spread word that Lillian and Jimmy were traveling to Independence to visit their uncle, creating a deliberate target for Blackwood to follow, while actually setting a trap with the sheriff's help. "It's too dangerous," Lillian protested. "Using ourselves as bait." "Not ourselves," Vaughn clarified. "I'll hire a couple to pose as you and Jimmy, traveling in a well-guarded stagecoach. Meanwhile, we'll be positioned to catch Blackwood when he makes his move." She didn't like it, but had to admit it had a certain logic. And if he sees through it, then we're no worse off than we are now. The plan was set in motion the next day. Word was deliberately leaked that Mrs. Thornton and her brother would be traveling to Independence on the Thursday stage, an apparent attempt to remove themselves from danger. The sheriff quietly arranged for armed men to accompany the stage, while Vaughn recruited several trusted townsmen to join him in lying in wait along the route. Lillian insisted on being part of the ambush party, despite Vaughn's objections. "I can shoot," she reminded him. "My father taught me. And I won't sit safely in town while you risk your life." In the end, he relented, recognizing the determination in her eyes. Thursday dawned clear and cold. The stagecoach departed on schedule, carrying a young married couple who had volunteered to play the roles of Lillian and Jimmy, well compensated for the risk. Vaughn, Lillian, the sheriff, and 6 other men had ridden out before dawn, positioning themselves at a narrow pass 5 miles outside town, where the stage road wound between rocky outcroppings, a perfect spot for an ambush, and therefore the perfect spot to catch the ambushers. Hours passed in tense silence. Lillian, crouched behind a boulder with a rifle across her knees, felt every minute stretch endlessly. Beside her, Vaughn's face was a mask of concentration, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. "What if they don't come?" she whispered. "They'll come," he said with grim certainty. "Blackwood won't pass up this chance." He was right. Shortly before noon, the lookout they'd posted signaled, riders approaching from the north, moving stealthily through the underbrush parallel to the road. "That's them," Vaughn murmured. "Get ready." Lillian's heart pounded as she watched Blackwood and his men take up positions overlooking the pass, exactly as predicted. They were maybe 20 yards from where she and Vaughn hid, close enough that she could see Blackwood check his pocket watch, evidently timing the stage's arrival. The plan was to wait until Blackwood made his move against the stage, catching him in the act. But something went wrong. One of the townsmen in their party shifted position, dislodging a small cascade of pebbles that clattered down the slope. Blackwood's head snapped up, instantly alert. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the rocks around him. "Ambush!" he shouted, drawing his gun. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides, bullets whining off rocks and kicking up dust. Lillian fired her rifle at a man trying to flank their position, her shot going wide but forcing him to take cover. Beside her, Vaughn was a study in lethal focus, each of his shots finding its mark. 2 of Blackwood's men fell, wounded but alive. The others, including Blackwood himself, retreated to better positions, returning fire with practiced precision. "Stay down," Vaughn ordered Lillian as bullets struck the boulder protecting them. The sheriff was shouting orders, trying to coordinate their scattered group. One of the townsmen cried out, hit in the arm. Lillian saw him stumble and fall exposed on an open patch of ground, still drawing fire. Before she could think better of it, she darted out from cover, reaching the wounded man and dragging him behind a fallen tree. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet, but somehow she made it unscathed. "Damn it, Lillian." Vaughn's voice carried over the gunfire, equal parts fury and terror. She ignored him, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the townsman's wound. His face was gray with pain, but he managed a weak smile of thanks. The gunfight seemed to go on forever, though in reality it couldn't have been more than minutes. Gradually, the return fire from Blackwood's men decreased as they were picked off or fled. Then, suddenly, there was silence. Lillian peeked over the fallen tree to see the sheriff advancing cautiously, gun trained on something or someone out of her line of sight. "It's over," the sheriff called. "We got him." Lillian rushed to where Vaughn was helping the sheriff secure a wounded, cursing Blackwood. The man's shoulder was bleeding heavily, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You won't get away with this," he spat at Vaughn. "Ambush, that's attempted murder, Sheriff." "Self-defense," the sheriff corrected. "After you and your men opened fire on lawful citizens of Columbia. You'll be facing a judge in Jefferson City, Mr. Blackwood." As the sheriff led Blackwood away, Vaughn turned to Lillian, his expression thunderous. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Running out in the open like that. You could have been killed." "I couldn't just let him bleed out there," she retorted. "And I'm fine, aren't I? By sheer luck." Vaughn grasped her shoulders, his fingers digging in almost painfully. "Lillian, if anything had happened to you," the anger in his voice broke, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that cut straight to her heart. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "But nothing did happen," she said softly. "We're both all right, and it's over now." He pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. "It's over," he agreed hoarsely. The aftermath was surprisingly anticlimactic. Blackwood and his surviving men were transported to Jefferson City to await trial. The two who had been wounded in the gunfight were treated by Dr. Willoughby, then placed under guard until they too could be moved. Columbia gradually returned to normal, though Vaughn and Lillian found themselves minor celebrities for a time. Jimmy returned from his safe haven, full of excitement about his adventure on the farm and disappointment at having missed the real adventure in town. "Maybe next time," Vaughn teased, ruffling the boy's hair. "There won't be a next time," Lillian said firmly. Life settled into a new rhythm. Vaughn, at the sheriff's suggestion, took on the role of deputy, his skills and experience a valuable addition to the town's law enforcement. Lillian continued at the Gazette, taking on more responsibility as Mr. Reynolds's health began to decline. Jimmy thrived in school, making friends and growing inches seemingly overnight. Spring came to Missouri, bringing with it new beginnings. The trial of Jasper Blackwood resulted in a lengthy prison sentence, removing that particular threat from their lives. Vaughn began construction on a proper house at the edge of town, a project that occupied much of his free time and filled him with visible pride. And then, on a warm May morning, Lillian made a discovery that changed everything again. She'd been feeling unwell for weeks, tired, queasy, her monthly courses absent. At first, she'd attributed it to stress and the lingering effects of the winter's events. But as Mrs. Reynolds had knowingly pointed out, there was usually a simpler explanation for such symptoms in a newlywed. Dr. Willoughby confirmed her suspicions. She was expecting a child, due in late November, telling Vaughn was a moment she would treasure forever. They had been walking home from church, Jimmy running ahead to greet friends, when she'd simply taken his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she'd said, watching his face as comprehension dawned. The look of wonder that transformed his features, the way he'd pulled her into his arms right there on Main Street. Heedless of the scandalized glances from passing matrons, these were memories she would hold close for the rest of her life. The months that followed were busy ones. The new house was completed by late summer, a sturdy two-story structure with plenty of room for their growing family. Vaughn proved to be unexpectedly handy at crafting furniture, filling their home with beautifully made pieces that Lillian knew would become heirlooms. Jimmy, initially uncertain about the prospect of a new sibling, gradually warmed to the idea, especially when Vaughn began including him in preparations for the baby, building a cradle together and planning the nursery. As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The stagecoach robbery that had seemed like such a disaster had led them to Columbia, to Vaughn, to this new life that sometimes felt too perfect to be real. There were still moments of worry, of course. Vaughn's past had a way of surfacing at unexpected times: a former associate passing through town, a mention in a newspaper of some old case he'd been involved in. But these were mere ripples now, not the tidal waves that had once threatened to overwhelm them. November arrived with an early cold snap. Lillian, now in her final days of pregnancy, felt ungainly and impatient, eager to meet the child who kicked so vigorously beneath her heart. On the evening of November 20th, while Vaughn was reading to Jimmy by the fire, Lillian felt the first contractions begin. By midnight, they were coming regularly enough that Vaughn sent for Dr. Willoughby, his normally steady hands shaking as he helped her to their bedroom. "Everything will be fine," she assured him, though the pain was already intense. The labor was long and difficult. By dawn, Lillian was exhausted, her strength flagging as the contractions grew more powerful. Dr. Willoughby's expression became increasingly concerned as he examined her. "The baby's positioned awkwardly," he told Vaughn in a low voice that Lillian nevertheless overheard. "It's making progress difficult." Vaughn's face paled. "Is she in danger?" "Not yet," the doctor hedged. "But if the labor continues much longer without progress—" Another contraction seized Lillian, this one so powerful she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. Through the haze of agony she heard Vaughn's voice, steady despite his fear. "Tell me what to do," he was saying to the doctor. "Anything, whatever it takes." The next hours passed in a blur of pain, exhaustion, and determination. Lillian fought with everything she had, clinging to Vaughn's hand as if it were a lifeline. Mrs. Porter came to help, her practical efficiency a counterpoint to Dr. Willoughby's growing concern. Finally, as the clock in the hallway struck 3 in the afternoon, Dr. Willoughby announced that it was time to push. Lillian gathered her waning strength, bearing down with each contraction as instructed. "I can see the head," the doctor encouraged. "One more big push, Mrs. Thornton." With a final, monumental effort, Lillian felt her child slide into the world. There was a moment of terrifying silence, and then a lusty, indignant wail filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Willoughby announced, placing the squalling infant on Lillian's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Through tears of exhaustion and joy, Lillian gazed down at her son, red-faced, wrinkled, and utterly perfect. Vaughn leaned over them both, his own tears falling unchecked. "He's beautiful," he whispered, touching a finger to the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around it with surprising strength. "Just like his mother." They named him Samuel, after Lillian's father. Jimmy was allowed in shortly after, his initial trepidation at the sight of the tiny, wrinkled newcomer giving way to fascination and pride in his role as uncle. But as the initial euphoria faded, Lillian became aware that something was wrong. Dr. Willoughby and Mrs. Porter were exchanging worried glances, and there was more blood than there should have been. "The afterbirth isn't coming as it should," the doctor explained when Vaughn demanded answers, "and she's bleeding heavily." What followed was another battle, this one fought mostly by Dr. Willoughby as he worked to stop the hemorrhaging that threatened Lillian's life. Vaughn was banished from the room with Jimmy and the baby, left to pace the hallway in helpless fear. Inside, Lillian drifted in and out of consciousness, aware in her lucid moments of the doctor's tense instructions to Mrs. Porter, of the metallic smell of blood, of her own body's betrayal after the triumph of bringing new life into the world. At some point hours or minutes later, she couldn't tell she heard Dr. Willoughby say quietly to Mrs. Porter, "I've done all I can. The rest is up to her strength and God's will." Darkness closed in again, but this time it was different, deeper, more pervasive. Lillian felt herself floating, detached from the pain and fear that had consumed her. Somewhere distant, she thought she could hear Vaughn calling her name. She fought her way back to consciousness with the same determination that had characterized her entire life. The room came into focus slowly. The lamp burning low, Mrs. Porter dozing in a chair by the bed, Dr. Willoughby slumped at her desk, making notes in his journal. "Doctor," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. He looked up, surprise and relief washing over his tired features. "Mrs. Thornton, welcome back." The next days passed in a haze of weakness and gradual recovery. The doctor remained concerned about the amount of blood she had lost and insisted she stay in bed. Vaughn barely left her side, caring for her and the baby with tender vigilance. As her strength slowly returned, Lillian became aware of the whispered conversations between Vaughn and the doctor, the worried furrow that never quite left her husband's brow. "What aren't you telling me?" she demanded one evening when they were alone with Samuel sleeping in his cradle beside their bed. Vaughn hesitated, then sighed. "Dr. Willoughby says. He says you nearly died, Lillian, and that another pregnancy might kill you." The implications settled over her like a heavy blanket. No more children, just this one precious boy and Jimmy whom she loved as her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling. "I know you wanted a large family." "Don't you dare apologize," Vaughn said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "You and Samuel and Jimmy are all the family I need. More than I ever dreamed of having." The depth of emotion in his voice convinced her. "I love you," she said simply, "and I love you more than life itself." A week after Samuel's birth, Dr. Willoughby came to check on Lillian's progress. He seemed pleased with what he found, pronouncing her recovery remarkable given the circumstances. When the examination was complete, Vaughn saw the doctor to the door while Lillian nursed Samuel. She could hear their voices from the hallway, the doctor's professional tone and Vaughn's deeper responses. Then Vaughn returned, a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" Lillian asked. "Dr. Willoughby just presented me with his bill," Vaughn said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "For the delivery and your care afterward." Lillian felt a stab of anxiety. Though they were comfortable now, a long illness and complicated birth would be expensive. "How much is it?" "That's just it," Vaughn said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "When I tried to pay him, he refused. Said it was already settled." "Settled? By whom?" Vaughn's lips curved in a bemused smile. "By me, apparently, though I have no recollection of paying him." Understanding dawned slowly. "What exactly did he say?" he said. "You already settled her account for life, Thornton." "The day you paid her brother's bill when she couldn't." Vaughn shook his head in wonder. "I'd forgotten all about that. It was just after I met you when Jimmy was shot. You were so worried about not being able to pay." The memory came back to Lillian in vivid detail, standing in Dr. Willoughby's office, tears streaming down her face as she realized they had no way to pay for Jimmy's care. "I cannot pay the doctor," she had sobbed, And Vaughn, a stranger then but already somehow important, had replied simply, "I already settled your account for life." She hadn't understood at the time what he meant, had thought he was just referring to Jimmy's immediate care. But Dr. Willoughby had evidently interpreted it more broadly. "He never sent us a bill for Jimmy's treatment either, did he?" Lillian realized. "I was so worried about it, but then with everything that happened—" "No, he didn't," Vaughn confirmed. "And when I tried to insist on paying today, he just said something about debts that can't be measured in dollars and cents." Lillian looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully after nursing, his tiny face relaxed in perfect trust. Then at Vaughn, this man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined when they'd first met on that dusty street in Columbia. "He's right," she said softly. "Some things can't be measured in money." "Like what we have," Vaughn agreed, reaching out to touch first Samuel's downy head, then Lillian's cheek. "This family, this life we've built." "And we'll continue to build," Lillian promised, leaning into his touch. "Together." In the years that followed, the Thornton family became a cornerstone of Columbia society. Vaughn eventually became sheriff when his predecessor retired, bringing his unique brand of justice tempered with compassion to the role. Lillian took over the Gazette when Mr. Reynolds passed away, turning it into one of the most respected newspapers in central Missouri. Jimmy grew into a fine young man, attending the university in St. Louis before returning to Columbia to practice law. Samuel inherited his father's height and his mother's determination, showing an early aptitude for both words and action that served him well as he followed in his brother's academic footsteps. Though they never had more biological children, their home was rarely empty. They fostered several orphan children over the years, giving them the same love and opportunities they had given Jimmy and Samuel. Some stayed for just a season, others became permanent additions to the family, each bringing their own light to the Thornton household. Dr. Willoughby remained a close friend until his death in 1890, after which Vaughn and Lillian established a fund in his name to provide medical care for those who couldn't afford it, ensuring that no one in Columbia would ever have to worry about paying the doctor. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family, Vaughn and Lillian stood in the garden of the home they had built together and renewed the vows they had made that New Year's Day so long ago. "I never imagined such happiness was possible," Lillian confessed to Vaughn as they danced beneath lanterns strung among the trees. "Not after everything we went through." "Maybe it was possible because of what we went through," Vaughn suggested, his hair now silver but his green eyes as bright as ever. "We learned early what was worth fighting for." Lillian rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady heartbeat that had been her anchor through all of life's storms. "And would you do it all again, knowing everything that would happen?" Vaughn's arms tightened around her. "In a heartbeat," he said without hesitation. "Every moment, good and bad, that led us here. Yes, I'd do it all again." "So would I," Lillian whispered, raising her face for his kiss as the music played on and the stars shone overhead, bearing witness to a love that had indeed been settled for life.